welcome to Side by Side with Gabi. I am Gabriela Frois, a teacher and teacher educator, and this is my opportunity to introduce you to some of the teacher educators I know and respect. Today I'll be talking to Arthur Médici, or Arthur, a very experienced EFL teacher and psychologist, who will share some insights on placement. He will explain why accurate placement is so important and how it can shape a student's learning journey. So let's get started. Can you introduce yourself and share a bit about your background, particularly your journey as an EFL teacher?
Sure. Uh, I think the very beginning of my career as a teacher of English started when I was in the last year of undergrad. I studied psychology, and when I was in my last year of university, that's when I applied for a few positions as an English language teacher because I was looking for something to do at this final stage of my undergrad course. And I got a job at a school that was exactly the school in which I had learned, like I studied throughout my teens, my childhood and my teens, which was, I think it's the school today that gets closest to the audiolingual approach.
Mm.
That's still in the market and stuff. So I taught at that school for about 4 years, and at the end of that period that I was in the school, that's when I started having students of my own, private students. And I just decided that I wanted to, I had at this school particularly, I had a course with a teacher. I don't know if I ever, told her that, but she was Giovanna, my teacher at the time. She taught a course on pronunciation, and that's when opened my mind to different ways of teaching, because I was so used to applying the techniques and the method that the school was,
Used to applying.
offering, to the students. That's when I came across a different way of doing things. And that's when I decided to venture into this aspect of, independent teaching. It was a pronunciation course with a book called English Pronunciation for Brazilians. And I got a gist a little of what a different type of, English language teaching looked like. And that's when I started venturing, like, with my own students. I left the school. I started working at a binational center, but I wasn't like working full time. I was teaching a few lessons here and there, and I was also working as a pedagogical consultant, talking to teachers in that institute. And that's when I really got into teaching using the communicative approach. And this is where my career as an independent teacher really started, because that's when I started to see other ways of doing things, see that this universe is much bigger than I was actually, used to.
Aware of.
Yeah, that I was aware of. That's when I got to know Breast Soul. That's when I started, I went to my first conference and I got in touch with other teachers. And some years after that, I had my business, like I had my own classroom in my house. I really love that space. And we moved to São Paulo. That's when I taught at Cultura Inglesa for a year. And I had I had contact with, lots of possibilities of qualification and stuff. And throughout this process, I've always worked as an independent teacher. I had experiences in these other schools. In 2013, sorry if I'm not going that linear.
That's okay.
Description. But in 2013, that's when I got my master's degree. Like I started my master's and I got my master's degree in 2016.
Hmm.
2017, I went for my CELTA. Um,
That
I did my,
was going to be my next question.
oh
Where does
yeah,
the
like
Celta
yeah,
enter in this? Yeah,
and I think my
17.
CELTA was
Hmm.
particularly interesting because I did it in the Czech Republic. I
Oh, that's so
did my CELTA
interesting.
in Prague, yeah, in the International House in Prague. And I wanted to have this experience of teaching students, like learners of English that don't speak Portuguese.
I did the same thing. I took the
Where
Celta
did you?
abroad. I went to Buenos Aires. So they
Oh,
were all Spanish
amazing. Yeah,
speaking learners. But it's an amazing experience, right?
it's a great experience. It's a great
Yeah,
experience.
it is a
You
great
kind of have this
experience.
disadvantage because I talk to some of my colleagues that have done their CELTA here in Brazil. And the CELTA was a great way of networking with other professionals and getting to know the trainers here in Brazil. So I think
Hmm.
it's also a great experience. But having this experience of teaching learners of English that don't speak Portuguese was really, it was a fascinating experience.
And also, I think mingle with other Celtis who are from completely different places. Because when I was in Buenos Aires, because it was an international house center, we had people from the UK, from Australia, from Colombia, Uruguay, lots of different countries there teaching with you. So you got in touch with different people from different backgrounds. It was great. Great.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that
Loved
was the
it.
same case for me. I
Yeah.
most of the Celtics in my group were from the US, some of them from the UK, a guy from
Mm.
Netherlands, and like it's a very interesting experience. And tutors from
Yeah.
different places as well. It's very nice.
Exactly, exactly. Now, you mentioned you have a very heavy background in psychology. You graduated in psychology and you have a master's in somewhat
Yeah, it's
a
psychology and
similar
learning.
area. Yeah,
Yeah.
psychology and
Yeah.
learning. How do you think this background in psychology influences your approach to teaching and student assessment, maybe?
I would say that this, like, whenever I talk about the influence of psychology in my uh, in who I am today as a professional,
Mhm.
I always like to look into, like, when you study psychology, you dive really deeply into aspects of learning. So you have a lot of contact with research, experimental, social research into human learning and social learning. And so there's a lot in terms of, like, the biological subjects like anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and then there's also the, human learning, human development, developmental stages,
Mhm.
and like language acquisition. We do have a section on in language acquisition in the course. So I think this gave me a very strong in the like a very strong sense of independence and what the things that I need to look for whenever I'm struggling with a student that's, you know whenever I have a student that's struggling with something,
Mhm.
in their language acquisition process, like, what's going on in here? Is it something? Do I have to dig deeper into any aspects of their life to understand? Like, do they have something influencing here? Is it like, do I
Mhm.
have to ask any specific kind of questions to kind of isolate variables and experiment with different arrangements with that student? This notion of experimental research and
Mhm.
developing this idea that I'm going to try something. Let's see how you respond to that. And if you do respond positively, we go from there. If you don't, we try something else. I think that came from my background in psychology mostly.
Yeah, I can see that you are very scientific. Uh,
Sometimes
in your
too
way of
much for
thinking.
comfort,
Yes,
yes.
because we've been doing some work together, and I see that you think of it in terms of research and so on. And I think it's a very useful background, right? Because for example, now that I'm finishing the DIPT, so and I have to work with research, I also go back to the research I had the chance to do when I was in college and in my master's to know how to do it well, and how
Yeah.
important it is to investigate things and to know how to search for sources and everything. It's not something intuitive, right? We have to learn and practice.
Yeah, we do. We do.
Uh,
When I was in my master's degree, I came across a field of study in education, and I learned the concept of teacher researcher, which is
mhm.
basically the teacher that elaborates hypotheses and experiments on things. Is not a teacher that does experiment on kids. Let's just be clear on that. It's like it's a person who elaborates hypotheses and tests their hypotheses and makes change, assesses the outcomes of it and makes changes to it. I've been, I implement that a lot. Sometimes I scare some people off when I talk too much about this, this aspect of experimenting and stuff. But I do like to look at things in a way that, okay, so let's try to understand which variables are influencing this,
Mhm,
and let's try to move them around one by one to kind of come to a conclusion in a way that it gets like these interfering variables out of the way, so we can clear out the path for a learner to develop by themselves. Like that's something that it's heavily based on my degree.
Yeah, yes, but I find it interesting how you can easily apply, it seems to me from the outside, that you don't find it hard to apply that to students and to assessment and to learning, and how you do it when you're teaching, and not research as something distant from the classroom that we do after the class is taught to analyze and so on. It's interesting. So I find it must be very useful and
It
valuable to have
is.
this kind of background, and it's an advantage that
And
few people have.
it's useful not only in a sense that it provides better, like it helps students to achieve their goals, but also in a way that it also gives me a lot of insight into my own practice, how I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
things and what
Mm-hmm.
I can do to improve. It's very
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. It shows. It shows. Okay, next question. Why do you believe that placement is critical in language learning, and how can it impact a student's journey?
Yeah. I see placement as something, usually teachers see placement as something that works for them, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
I have to carry out a placement to know where a student is. So that's going to benefit me. And I kind of disagree with that, because I do think that placement is something that serves the purpose, like both yourself as a teacher and your student. I think placement is the starting point. Placement will give yourself and will give your student a better understanding of where they are. It's kind of like their diagnostics, back to my, scientific background. I do know that some teachers like to use the term diagnostics, to understand where the student is, but it's kind of like your diagnostics assessment is like where you are and where you want to go. But having a clear perspective of where you are is
Mhm.
essential, because lots of students come to, I'm saying to me, but I think it comes to independent teachers and other teachers. Like, oh, I finished the advanced course in that school. All right, let's see where you are. Let's see what's going on. I'm not
Mhm.
doubting any procedures, but sometimes we get so used to the process of like moving pages and moving units in a school, and you progress and you pass tests and you go to the next module, so you get used to this transition process, and you kind of lose the sense of where you actually are in this. You don't know exactly what's going on in your learning. You don't know the factors that influence your own learning. And I think there's a
Mhm.
lot, like having another person look at you and be clearly able to tell what you're able and what you're not able to do, your strengths and your weaknesses, things to improve, and how long it's going to take for you to get where you want to be. Having a person like critically analyze this I think it's much more efficient than applying a test and score them, like mark them 0 to 10. I think it's much more useful to have someone describe your skills. And this is expectedly that's what a placement should do, is to be able to
Mm-hmm.
tell what a student is able to do, and not,
Mm-hmm.
if they know how to use the like this modal correctly, but how they actually how they're able to develop a conversation and how they're able to participate in a conversation. That's what an efficient placement should do.
Definitely. Yes. Um, well, we are about to give a workshop on placement, right? And I'll be collaborating on the CEFR aspect of the course. So my next question is, how do you see the CEFR framework fitting into the placement process?
Yeah, I love this because we've been talking about
Yeah.
the use of the CFR, and we spotted, oh, this is a great place to talk about the CFR, because I think understanding the CFR, thinking about the reality of the teachers, if you're working for a school, if you're working for a regular school or a language school, I think understanding the CFR is a way to uh, it's a way to understand where the assessments that you're doing with your students are in this process. So if you apply an exam and a student scores a certain way in that exam, what does that mean in terms of their development? If a student consistently scores a 10 in your exam, what does it mean? What is your student actually able to do in this process? Like, do you is your student by scoring a 10 in your exam, do you know if your student's able to communicate in a certain way, describe a certain idea? Like, I think the CFR is kind of like a reality check to see, like,
Mhm.
that student scoring this much, but is he or she able to do this and that? And how what resources do I have to complement this assessment process that I have to, be make sure that the student is in fact developing according to what's expected in their level, and that's where the CFR comes in.
Mm.
And also, if you're an independent teacher, I think understanding the CFR is critical, especially when you're making, when you're projecting and you're trying to understand where the student's going to be in a few years' time. So if you want to get
Definitely.
from here to here, and in your placement you're here, how long will it take you to get to here? How, and sometimes just as importantly as how long is how much effort is it going to take for you to get where you want to be? And the CFR is, I think, it's the best description we have available nowadays
Mm-hmm.
to really understand in terms of skills, uh, what how they and how long they will need to achieve where they want to be.
Definitely. And I think not all teachers are aware of what of how much is inside the CFR, because we usually think of the CFR as a list of 6 levels and a certain number of hours. But when you start understanding the details and the intricacies of the framework, you start really thinking of the language in terms of abilities and in terms of um, things you can develop in yourself,
Yeah.
right? So the more we know about it, I would say the more we understand not only where the student is, but where they can get. Definitely.
And I think the CFR is also a great source of ideas for your classes.
Mm, yes,
Like,
because if you think of the
whenever,
competencies, you can,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. like that student can read a news article and react to it in a certain way. Okay, cool. So that's probably something I should be working with my student in the classes, you know. Or if I teach,
Exactly.
if I teach in a context that I don't have that sort of flexibility in designing my syllabus, that's something additional I can bring to my student, you know, to complement their learning. So to supplement their learning, sorry. So I think it's fundamental.
Yeah, definitely. So talking a little bit more about the workshop, could you share a few practical tips for teachers that want to improve their placement assessment before they watch the workshop?
I think it's very important for teachers to have in mind that the placement is a moment for listening. That's where you want to listen to your students. You want to listen to their insecurities. You want to listen to their experiences. You want to listen to you know what they're capable of achieving and how extensively they can develop a message. They can communicate an idea. It's a moment to be asking questions and questions and questions. Go as far as you can go in a conversation. Try to get them out of their comfort zones and listen to what they're capable of doing. Try to uh, reason it out as much as possible. Try to understand where things come from. It's a very active moment in which you're going to have to make decisions because this is a moment that you're going to place that student somewhere. And
Mm-hmm.
this place that you're going to put your student in, it's something that um, it's going to be detrimental for their development. We talk a little bit about misplacing a student, and that can be very this can be very detrimental to that student's motivation to move on in their learning trajectories. So we have to be very careful in this process because this you may be faced with a student that comes from a very long history of frustration and
Mm-hmm.
challenges, and if like that student want to be heard, that student want to feel
Mm-hmm.
comfortable, they want to make sure that they're opening up and they're sharing their language with a person that's going to help them move forward. So that's a critical moment for listening.
Beautiful. I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah. I even got lost. My final question. What do you think is one takeaway that you hope the participants will gain from taking the workshop?
So I think in general terms, I expect participants to be able to understand that there are different ways that you can assess those the prospect students that come to us, or even students that need to be placed again for whatever reason. But there are multiple ways of carrying this out, and each one of the ways has to be aligned with that student's goals. So whatever factors you have to take into consideration in order to carry out a placement assessment effectively, and what types of questions are interesting and should be asked to assess different skills that
Mm-hmm.
your learner will show in the conversation, and what to do afterwards according to what your student's able to do. So what now? What is expected? What
Mm-hmm.
is that person expecting you to do, and what should you do in order to meet that expectation? So this is what I think it's going to be like the most important takeaways of this workshop.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Arthur, for this insightful conversation.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you again. It's a pleasure to be working again with you.
And thank you for watching. I hope you found this conversation insightful and that it gave you some ideas to take into your own practice. And if you'd like to know more, if you'd like to learn more, be sure to check Arthur's workshop on placement. It is packed with practical tips and strategies that you can take into your classroom immediately after you finish watching. Don't forget to follow me here and on my platform for more conversations like these. See you next time.